So when I got to college as a freshman, my roommate and I didn't have much in common. He was an Indian kid from Burlington, Iowa, and I was a white guy from Manhattan. But we had one thing in common, and that was a fervent goal and desire to lose our virginity as fast as humanly possible. Now, there was no reason to think that this would happen. High school was not what you would call a fertile time for me. I'd been up the shirt once. I got a huge hickey one night. And I think if you polled the girls in my high school, they would say that Graham is the funniest, nicest friend I've ever met. But I was at Vassar College, a seven sisters organization that was 60-40 women, and there was a lot of gay men, right? So I thought it was gonna be like, have you ever seen Charlotte's Web? You know Templeton the Rat when he's like imagining all the food when he's drunk? I thought it was gonna be like labias and clitorises and boobs like just floating everywhere, right? Like a tidal wave of sex, right? So my roommate and I had to figure out a plan, right, for what happens if we were both needed to have sex, like at the same time in the room, right? So this is before cell phones, right? So cell phones, this is 1995, right? So we didn't have cell phones. So we did have a piece of technology that many of you maybe use now in office settings called a whiteboard, right? So we would use this, right? So we would write a code word, right, on the whiteboard to warn each other off, right? And so he's like, all right, I got it. I'm like, all right, what's the code word? And he's like, tippy toe. And I was like, okay, that's the dumbest code. We cannot use that code word. It's gonna be very obvious it's a code word, right? So I'm like, do you know a loo? And he's like, I don't know a loo. I'm like, I don't know a loo. We're gonna write loo called on the whiteboard, and that's a sign that someone's like making people's dreams come true, right? So don't come in, right? Okay, great. So August turned to September, September to October, October, November. It was not really a tidal wave. It was more like a desert, right? But I mean, it was true that being a nice, funny guy in college was good, right? There was some making out, right? The tickle game a little bit, right? And so you know, things were, and people liked like a nice, funny guy. It was good. So this all culminated one Friday when there was a young lady in my Intro to American Politics class named Sarah, and we'd been flirting. And I was like, hey, do you want to come back after class? I know you have class, but I don't. Do you want to come back and see my room, which is the next step in the sexual evolution in college, right? And I was like, it's got a great view, which it does. It has a great, I would not lie to her for sex. It was a great view, right? Top of the quad. So she's like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, all right, right? So I go back to my room and she goes to her next class, so she studied harder than I did, right? So I went back to my room and I began what is known as the process, right? So I had this process all through college, which was kind of a problem. So first step in the process, right, was I would turn the halogen lamp to setting 2, right, which is the makeout setting, right? That's the dim setting, right? Second step was the Braveheart soundtrack. Yep, yeah. Right. And the third step was I would put on mesh shorts, right? Yeah. I know. I was like I was sort of like I'm happy to see you, but you know, whatever. I don't know what I did, but I did it, right? So then I immediately went outside, right? And I wrote on the whiteboard, Lou called, like all over the place, right? Like Lou called, call Lou back, it's an emergency, Lou called again, I think Lou's sick. Like the whole whiteboard was Lou called, right? That was it, right? And then I waited, right? And I heard the elevator come up about 45 minutes later, and it's an old building, right? It's an elevator, it stops, and there's a knock at the door. And I'm like, all right, so I open the door, sort of lean up against the sill, and I'm like, oh, hey, want to come in? Which, with like bagpipes, strains of bagpipes coming over my head. And like what I'm sure is like a raging erection, right? And she, like many college women, was sort of like, all right, fine, right? So, okay, right? So she came in, And we looked at the quad real quick, very pretty. And then we got down to business, right? So her shirt's off and my shirt's off and her jeans are off and the bra's off and my mesh shorts are off, right? And we're doing things, right? We're like, it's like do, right? I'm trying very desperately to figure out like what to do. Sarah McLachlan had an album that came out around this time called Fumbling Towards Ecstasy, which was an accurate description of what I was doing. Also a much better album to hook up to than the Braveheart soundtrack, right? But so we're getting it on and the drums and the bagpipes and it's all happening, right? And all of a sudden I hear the elevator, right? And I'm at this point like close, right? Like we've gotten through all the stuff, right? Now we're like ready to, get the mountaintop, right? And I'm like stay on target, right? Like we're only getting, right? And the elevator comes up to the floor, right? And I'm like, oh, I know it's him. This is totally him, right? I know it's him. And I'm still like, right? Like all these things, right? And so I hear him outside the room, and I hear, oh, Lou called, and the door just swings open. And she screams, and I'm like naked with like mesh shorts covering my junk, and I'm like looking like an idiot. And he's like, oh, sorry, right? And then he closed the door, right? And at this point, like I had a synapse that broke in my brain. I was like, what do we say? What do we say? Did we say there was a code word? Yes. I'm like, right, okay. And what was the code word? What was the code word? And he's like, Lou called. I'm like, right, oh, okay. Look on the door. What does it say on the door? And he's like, Lou called a lot. I'm like, I know. Lou called a lot. Right? I was like, so why would you open the door? And he goes, but bro, I just met a guy named Lou at the library today. And I was like, wait, what are the chances that on the day that I am to lose, the only thing I care about, you meet a dude named Lou at the library, right? And he's like, it's funny, because I didn't give him my number. And I was like, wait, how would he call so many times if you didn't give him the number, right? And at this point, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that Sarah was dressed. And also, it should be noted that we'd reached the point in the movie when William Wallace was betrayed. The spoiler alert, sorry if you haven't seen it. But the music was real, like, sonorous and depressing, right? Which is befitting of the situation that I found myself in. So she is at the door, and she turns around, and she's like, I never want to see you again. And I was like, no, that's totally cool, fair. No, 100%, I got it. Yeah, this is terrible for everybody. And the door opens, and she leaves. And then I'm like, what? You've ruined the only thing that I've ever wanted my entire life. And he's like, I'm sorry. And we're going back and forth. And so then we went to McDonald's. Because when you're a freshman, dudes like those, so you do. But I made him pay. So we took some immediate steps after the snafu. We went back to Tippy Toe. Because clearly we weren't able to handle any kind of codes of any kind. And for those of you who are wondering or curious, I did lose my virginity. So thank you. It's December 13th, 1995. It was very fast, but it's over with now. And so then a couple months after that, right, February, right, I came back to our dorm room, and as I was walking down the hall, on the whiteboard in big letters, it said Tippy Toe. And I got to the door, and I was standing outside it, and I was like, Tippy Toe? I just met a guy named Tippy Toe at the library today. Thank you very much.